Hi, you're a collection of things. 2 arms, 10 fingers, 1 questionable haircut. And the second you notice that, you're already doing math. You counted. That's it. That's all counting is. And counting is where the whole thing starts. But wait a minute. What exactly is going on here? You just counted your fingers. To count them, you did something sneaky. You grouped them together into one collection. 10 fingers, 1 group. In math, that group is called a set. And a set is just things collected together. Your fingers are a set. The numbers 1 through 10 are a set. Every even number, all of them, forever, that's a set too. The stuff inside is called elements. And that's the whole idea. A set holds things. Now the fun part. You can put sets against each other. Here's the even numbers. Here's the numbers under 10. Some belong to both. 4, 6, 8. That shared bit is the intersection. Dump both sets together into one pile, that's the union. And ask what's not in a set, everything it's missing, that's the complement. So, numbers. You already know the first ones, 1, 2, 3, 4. The counting numbers, the ones you use for fingers and sheep. Math calls them the natural numbers. Simple enough. But then someone asked, what about nothing? You can have 3 apples, you can have 0 apples. So they added 0. Fine. Then someone asked a worse question. What about less than nothing? You can't hold -2 apples, but you can owe someone 2 apples. So they added the negatives, -1, -2, -3, and now the numbers run in both directions forever. That whole set is called the integers. Then came dividing. Split 1 pizza between 2 people, and each gets a half. That's not a whole number anymore. Any number you can write as one integer over another, a half, 3/4, 7/3, is called a rational number. And you'd think that's everything. Every number should be some fraction. But it's not. Take the square root of 2. Try to write it as a fraction, and you can't. Ever. The digits go on forever with no pattern. Numbers like that are called irrational, and pi is the famous one. Put the rationals and the irrationals together, every number on the line, and you've got the real numbers. Numbers are easy to work with once you know them. 2 + 2, 7 × 3, done. Things got interesting the day someone wrote down a number they didn't know yet. Here's the trick. You know a number exists, you just don't know its value. So instead of leaving a blank, you drop in a letter. X. That's a variable. A box waiting for a number to move in. The numbers you do know, the plain fixed ones, those are constants. 5 is 5, always, it never moves. And the things you do to numbers, add, subtract, multiply, divide, those are operations. Now notice something. Every operation has an opposite that undoes it. Add 3, then subtract 3, you're back to the start. They cancel each other out. That sounds obvious, but it's secretly the most powerful move in all of math, because canceling is how you go hunting for a variable you don't know, and that hunt has a name. That hunt is called solving an equation. An equation is just 2 things set equal, with an unknown hiding somewhere inside. X + 4 = 10. Somewhere in there is a value of x that makes it true, and your job is to dig it out. Here's how the digging works. You want x alone on one side, so you peel away everything sitting next to it, using those opposites from before. X + 4 = 10. Subtract 4 from both sides, the +4 cancels, and x = 6. That's it. That's every equation you'll ever solve. Cancel things until the unknown is standing alone. But not every equation is that polite. Sometimes the variable comes multiplied by itself. X times x, written x². Now it's a quadratic. And quadratics play a weird trick. They usually have 2 answers, not 1. Think about it. -2² is 4, and +2² is also 4. So if x² = 4, x could be either. Let the variable climb even higher, x³, x to the 4th, and you've got a polynomial, which can have even more answers, 1 for each time the variable is raised. The rule is simple. The highest power tells you how many solutions to expect. Most of them you crack by breaking the equation into smaller pieces, and when it's too ugly to break, there's a formula that forces the answer out every time. But there's one equation that breaks all these rules, because the variable isn't being raised to a power. The variable is the power. When the variable moves up into the exponent, everything changes. Instead of x², you get 2 to the x. That's an exponential, and it doesn't grow like normal numbers, it explodes. Watch. 2 to the 1 is 2, 2 to the 2 is 4, then 8, 16, 32. Each step doesn't add, it doubles. A few steps in, and the number's already enormous. That's the whole personality of an exponential. The bigger it gets, the faster it grows. 3 parts run the whole thing. The base is the number doing the multiplying, and it sets the speed. The exponent is how many times it multiplies, usually your variable. And the starting value is where it all begins. Flip the base to something small, less than 1, and instead of exploding it collapses, shrinking towards 0 but never quite touching it. That's exponential decay. This is the math behind money in a bank, a population booming, a virus spreading, a rumor getting out. Anything that grows by feeding on its own size. So far, everything's lived on a number line, points strung along in a row. But numbers don't have to stay in a line. Give a number a direction instead of just a spot, and it turns into something you can see. Put two numbers together, how far across, how far up, and you've marked a point in space. Connect points and you get a line. Close the lines up and you get a shape. That's all a shape is. Numbers fencing off a piece of space. Start flat in 2 dimensions. A square, a circle, a triangle. Every flat shape has an area, which is just how much room it covers. And almost every area comes from the same move. Base times height. A rectangle is base times height. A triangle is base times height, cut in half, because it's a rectangle sliced corner to corner. The circle's the rebel. It doesn't have a base, it has a radius. So its area is pi times the radius squared. Now lift those flat shapes into 3 dimensions. A square becomes a cube, a circle becomes a sphere. Now they don't just cover room, they hold it, and how much they hold is the volume. Same idea again, the area of the base times the height, with small tweaks per shape. And the sphere, of course, refuses to cooperate and needs its own formula. Every object around you, everything, is just these shapes stuck together. But one shape matters more than all the others, and it's the plainest one on the list. The triangle. 2,500 years ago, a guy named Pythagoras stared at right triangles, the ones with a perfect square corner, and noticed something that never breaks. Take the 2 short sides, square each one, add them up, and you get the square of the long side, the one facing the corner, called the hypotenuse. Always. Every right triangle, forever. 3, 4, 5. Square 3, square 4, that's 9 and 16, add them, 25, and the long side is 5. It just works. That's the Pythagorean theorem, and it locks the 3 sides of a triangle together. But the sides were only half the story. What about the angles? 300 years later, someone asked how the angle inside a triangle connects to its sides, and that question opened up trigonometry. Here's the idea. Pick one angle in a right triangle. Label the sides by how they sit around it, the one across from it, the one next to it, and the long one, the hypotenuse. Turns out, for any angle, the ratios between those sides are locked. 3 functions capture all of it. Sine is the far side over the hypotenuse. Cosine is the near side over the hypotenuse. Tangent is far over near. Feed any of them an angle, and out comes a ratio that tells you the exact shape of the triangle, which is neat for triangles. It gets strange when you trap that triangle inside a circle. Draw a circle and make its radius exactly 1. That's the unit circle, and it looks harmless. Now stand a right triangle up inside it, one corner at the center, the long side reaching out to the edge. Since the radius is 1, the hypotenuse is always 1. And the moment the hypotenuse is 1, something clean happens. Sine was the far side over the hypotenuse, but the hypotenuse is 1, so the far side just is the sine. The near side just is the cosine. The triangle's corner touches the circle at a point, and that point's coordinates are simply cosine and sine of the angle. Now spin it. Walk the angle around the circle and watch that point ride the edge. Its height rises, peaks, falls, dips below, comes back. Sine is just that height, going up and down forever as you loop. Unroll that motion into a graph, and you get a wave. Smooth, endless, repeating. That's where waves come from. Sound, light, radio, tides, every wave in the universe traces back to a point going around this circle. One more thing hides in here. Angles don't have to be measured in degrees. Measure them by how far you travel around the edge instead, and that unit is called a radian. All the way around is 2 pi radians, and that swap is what lets circles and waves speak the same language as the rest of math. So a single spinning point gave us waves. But hidden inside all of this, triangles, circles, exponentials, is one bigger idea quietly running the whole show. That idea is a function. A function is a machine. A number goes in, the machine does something to it, a number comes out. That's it. Put in 3, the machine adds 1, out comes 4. Same input, same output, every single time. That's the one rule a function has to follow. One input can't give 2 different answers. Everything we've already seen was secretly a function. An equation, a curve, sine and cosine. All machines taking an input and handing back an output. And here's why functions are worth the trouble. You can draw them. Feed the machine every possible input. Plot each result as a point. How far across is the input? How far up is the output? And the points connect into a curve that shows you the function's entire personality at a glance. A plane function draws a straight line. A quadratic bends into a single smooth curve, one hill or one valley. A polynomial wiggles, turning up and down several times. An exponential rockets upward and never turns back. You stop doing arithmetic and start seeing the shape of the math. And once you can see a function as a curve, you can start asking sharper questions about it. Like, what is it doing at one exact spot, at one precise instant? And that question is where the whole thing cracks open. Take a function and zoom in on one exact point. Not near it, on it. Most of the time, nothing dramatic, the curve is right where you'd expect. But sometimes the function breaks at that spot. There's a hole, or a jump, a place where the machine chokes and can't give an answer. So instead of asking what the function is at that point, you ask a sneakier question. What is it heading toward as you creep closer and closer? That target is called the limit. Watch how it works. Slide in from the left, the curve climbs toward 4. Slide in from the right, it also closes in on 4. Both sides aim at the same value, so even if the point itself is missing, you know exactly where the function was trying to go. The limit is 4. This matters because it lets you handle the places math used to just quit. A curve you can draw without lifting your pen is called continuous, smooth, no surprises. The instant there's a hole or a jump or a break, it's discontinuous, and limits are how you deal with those broken spots without falling in. That sounds like a small tool. It isn't. Limits crack open the two most powerful ideas in all of math. The first one measures change itself. Say you're driving. Your speedometer reads 60, but think about what that actually means, 60 miles per hour. When you're not driving for an hour, you're passing one exact instant. How fast are you moving right now, at a single frozen moment? That's the question that built the derivative. Here's the problem. Speed is distance over time, but at one instant, no time passes, and you can't divide by nothing. So you sneak up on it. Measure the speed over a big gap, then a smaller gap, then smaller still, closer and closer to that single instant. That's a limit, doing exactly what it does best. And the number it closes in on is the derivative, the exact rate of change at one point. There's a clean picture for this. Zoom into any curve far enough and it flattens into a straight line. Lay a line that just barely kisses the curve at one point, touching but not crossing. That's the tangent. And its steepness is the derivative. Steep tangent, fast change. Flat tangent, no change at all. Doing that with limits every time would be miserable, so there's a shortcut called the power rule. A variable raised to a power, like x cubed, you pull the power down to the front and drop it by 1, and x cubed becomes 3x squared. One line, no limits, done. The derivative tells you how fast something is changing at any instant. Now run the whole idea in reverse, and you can measure something that looks impossible. Here's the impossible looking problem. How do you measure the area under a curve? A rectangle is easy, length times width. But a curve? It bends, it wanders. There's no clean formula for the space trapped underneath it. So here's the move. Fill that space with rectangles. Skinny ones, standing side by side under the curve. Add up their areas and you get close, but the tops don't quite fit the curve. There are little gaps and overshoots. So make the rectangles thinner. More of them, thinner still. The thinner they get, the better they hug the curve. And if you push that all the way to infinitely many, infinitely thin rectangles, the error vanishes and the area becomes exact. That's an integral. It's a limit again. The same trick, sneaking up on infinity to get a perfect answer. And here's the beautiful part. The integral is just the derivative running backwards. Derivatives take a function and find its rate of change. Integrals take that rate of change and rebuild the original. They undo each other, the two halves of calculus, one taking things apart, one putting them back together. Everything we've done so far has one thing in common though. It's certain. Exact answers, exact curves, exact areas. But the real world isn't certain. Most of the time, you don't know what's going to happen. So how do you measure something that hasn't happened yet? You use probability, the math of what might happen. Here's the whole idea in one move. Count the outcomes you want, divide by all the outcomes possible. Flip a coin. One side is heads, that's the outcome you want. Two sides total. 1/2, 1/2, 50%. That's it, that's probability. Roll a die and want a 4, one face out of 6, so 1 in 6. Every probability lands between 0 and 1. 0 means it never happens. 1 means it's certain, guaranteed. Everything real lives in between, a maybe with a number attached. And here's the rule that ties it shut. Add up the chances of every possible outcome, and they always total exactly 1. Something has to happen, so all the maybes together make one whole certainty, which flips into a handy trick. The chance something happens, plus the chance it doesn't, is also 1. So if you know one, you know the other. And that's the machine. You started this video by counting your fingers. Now you can count the odds of things that don't even exist yet, from a set of 10 fingers, all the way to measuring the future. So that's the whole of math. Sets, numbers, equations, shapes, functions, calculus, all of it, one idea stacked on the last. I really hope this made things click for you. This video took a very long time to make, so if it did, maybe consider subscribing. See you in the next one.